All right, Mia and Haley. Well, I think if y'all are ready to get started, I'll just do a little brief introduction. Um, Thanks everybody for joining. If you haven't already, drop your uh, where you're calling from in the chat. But my name is Joe. I'm the community manager of the Aquaculture Information Exchange. We're a NOAA USDA backed website platform for the American aquaculture community, trying to foster new ways to connect and collaborate in the aquaculture space here. And as part of that, we host a ongoing series of webinars, which are presented by our members. We like to give people a platform to share their expertise and their opinions on aquaculture. And today we have Haley Stein and Mia Glover from the, and y'all are both from the North American Marine Alliance as well as Inland Ocean Coalition. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they are going to be presenting on a new initiative called the Aquaculture Atlas or Atlas Aquaculture. Um, and Yeah, for this one they will be giving a short presentation, but I think if I'm understanding correctly, the idea is this is sort of a input session, and they're really interested in gathering y'all's feedback on this new initiative. So yeah, I'm really excited to hear their presentation. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to them. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Um, yeah, really glad to be here and to be making these connections. The Atlas for Values-Based Aquaculture is kind of the long title, but we also just call it the Aquaculture Atlas. New project, completely in development right now. Um, so I'm going to just share my screen here, if you guys can see that, and we'll start with okay, cool. So everybody can see this okay? Amazing. Yeah, so we'll just start to introduce ourselves. My name is Haley Stein. I'm with Inland Ocean Coalition and North American Marine Alliance, and we're presenting this project, the Atlas for Values-Based Aquaculture. Um, with Inland Ocean Coalition, which is kind of more predominantly where we're coming from as part of this project, our mission is really broad, just for any issues relating to the ocean that can be relevant to people who live, maybe in non-coastal communities, we say, inland regions like Colorado, where we're based. But of course, we work across the nation and across the world through different initiatives. So the Atlas for Values-Based Aquaculture is one of the programs that we're working on now. My background with aquaculture is relatively limited, so I have worked with wild Atlantic salmon in a conservation hatchery, but actual commercial aquaculture, this is a big introduction for me as well. So we are, you know, really glad to have you guys here for this webinar to help us fill in some of the gaps with what this project, how we want it to look, and also ways, that it will be useful to you. So yeah, and I'm in comms and fundraising for Inland Ocean Coalition and also comms for NAMA as well. So yeah, Mia, there's my contact information. You guys feel free to take that down and reach out to me after this presentation. Mia, I'll let you say a few
Yeah, thank
words.
you. I am also with Inland and NAMA as well. And I'm also a PhD student at SUNY ESF in Syracuse, where I am a fisheries scientist. So I dabble a little bit in aquaculture there, mostly bivalves, but I have really been introduced to the aquaculture community through working with NAMA and a lot of their fisher folk there that I've been introduced to. So it's been a really cool experience, and I'm really excited to introduce this project to you guys because it's been great to get to know people who are doing this work and get some feedback from you guys. So we're stoked that we have so many of you joining us here. And feel free to reach out to me as well with questions afterwards. Hopefully, we can get to most of your questions after this brief presentation, which shouldn't take too long, and then we'll kind of open it up for discussion after that.
Let's see. There we go. Okay, so yeah, the Atlas for Values-Based Aquaculture. again, we want your help designing an atlas that works for you. Um, Here's a picture of an aquaculturist we are associated with, Pedro, who was growing oysters on the coast of Maine. And again, this is just to say that this project is very much in its nascent stage of development, and we are really grateful, like Mia said, to have your feedback and your engagement as we develop what we're putting out for you guys. So just a quick definition, the Atlas is an online home for anyone who supports aquaculture with values. Packed with resources, real life stories, the Atlas will help grow a thriving seafood economy to respect local communities, protect ecosystems, and share profit from source to table. So the thing that I think our Atlas, as we're designing it, that we want to really stick with is this idea of values through the aquaculture projects we support. We know that a lot of seafood is very exploitative and not great for communities and the environment. So, what are our values? To have a secure food supply, to safeguard ecosystems, center community, open opportunities, protect workers, honor local knowledge, respect tribal rights, and uphold accountability. Mia, if you want to hop in and say anything else about these values or what we're doing so far.
Yeah, we really spent a lot of time trying to think about what these values mean. And through other discussions that we've had, there have been, some questions regarding, what do these values mean? And so we're really open to kind of like discussing what each of these mean. And they always mean different things to different people as well, and how those look in different communities. So we're definitely open to having a discussion surrounding what the values mean for each aquaculturist or aquaculture worker. So yeah.
Yeah, and just to say that, with aquaculture as kind of a growing um, feature of the blue economy, like there's no necessarily one right way to do it. And that's also part of this discovery phase is seeing what are the techniques being applied. How can we, think of those techniques with respect to the environment, with respect to the workforce, and with respect to the product, the seafood that's being produced. So, yeah. And again, this Aquaculture Atlas, as we envision it, will be able to provide a lot of different features that can engage a lot of different audiences. So stories like from aquaculturists, for example, Pedro, who we saw in slide number 2, stories from people who are doing the work, or policy guides to help practitioners, understand what is or isn't permitted, or what kinds of permitting is necessary in different locales. Research, so incorporating, some of the up-to-date science on aquaculture, techniques and fish health, things like that. Shared language, so like what are the ways that we can talk about aquaculture? A lot of people, who are not involved in these communities know very little about what it means to farm fish and shellfish. So how can we develop a shared kind of way of speaking about it that helps people understand where they're getting their food from? Maps as well is a big one, and multi-layered maps as well. So maps that show both where different producers are, producers who are willing to share things like that about their projects, and also maps, to localize different policy landscapes and things of that nature. Resources in general, maybe how-to guides, how to get started, or how to reach out to your policymakers, your policy leaders, to have your opinions heard as aquaculturists. Funding sources, ways to get involved with something like Sea Grant that does offer support for people looking to develop these projects, and market networks, so actually connecting to consumers where possible, or wholesalers, whatever that might look like. So these are just some of the ideas of where we're focusing the build out of the Atlas. But again, we are really in the initial stage of development. So we would love for you all to help with that. And this QR code will send you to our platform right now as it is, where you'll have the opportunity to take a survey about what you're looking for in this resource. And that information is, I mean, that's like gold to us as we build this out to see what, matters for you guys who are really in it and who are looking to, or maybe get into it, aquaculture in general. So yeah, thank you for being here. It is a short presentation. We wanted to offer time for conversation, discussion, and also if you like time even just to take the survey, if that's something, available to you.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll leave this up for a little while.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I encourage people to go ahead and take the survey while we're doing the question and answers. But maybe if y'all could start out by just in terms of like what type of info you're really curious to hear about in terms of this project. Like I know you mentioned like getting feedback on the values perhaps, but yeah, I'm just wondering, yeah, what specifically y'all were looking to get feedback on.
Yeah, I think specifically, we just want to know what types of resources people would like to see in a resource like this. So, it will be a website that aquaculture practitioners, policymakers, researchers can go to, and we are really just looking for what that content looks like and what that will be for folks. So, what are the most important things that you all would want to see in a resource like this is really what we're looking for, just feedback on what that is going to look like.
Yeah, and for people who want to offer feedback, you can put it in the chat or raise your hand and I'll call on you. But yes, definitely interested to hear this as well. So this is something we do on the AIE as well. Um,
Hi, I think I've talked to you, Mia, before and up in Georgia, but I'm
Oh yeah,
working,
good to see you.
yeah, nice to see you too. And Aaron, thanks for introducing us via email afterwards too. So I guess I'm in the same boat as you and Joe, where I'm also working on creating a resource guide, though it's not focused on this like value base, it's focused on a geographic scope of the US Southeast, from Texas over to Florida and up to North Carolina. And it's really going to be focusing on kind of curating and creating a library of outreach and communication resources, oriented towards the public, consumers, the service industry, and like journalists and other communicators, not really producers. So I guess my curiosity is just kind of how you're, and you probably got questions on this too, how you're scoping like the value based, because I think that's a little bit difficult because, everyone probably thinks they're doing the right thing in some way, right? So like they feel they have values or what they're doing is value based. So I guess I'm just curious about how you guys think you're going to go about like, creating those boundaries or lines. You can go back to that screen too. Is it based on production methods or if they're implementing best practices? I guess kind of what is the scoping of that?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I'm also really curious to see like what materials you're working with. Again, like communicating to the public is a huge part of anything to do with aquaculture these days, I feel like. Um, but yeah, in terms of like what these values mean, and Mia can also, I'm sure, say a lot about this, but we're, you know, this idea of accountability, so minimizing impact on the ocean ecosystem, right? Is I would say one element that's probably more straightforward. Also, labor, protecting workers, making sure that everybody on the um, involved in the project is receiving fair treatment and fair wage. These are not always easy to identify with operations, but in general, we're focusing on smaller scale projects, I would say, as just a guide. But again, it's going to look differently for each project. So I would say that the atlas itself, in what we highlight, will be maybe more qualitative than quantitative in terms of just projects available, but we want it again for people to act as models for what a project, an aquaculture project that is values based, even looks like. Hopefully that
Yeah,
Is
so I think I understand what you're saying. You're kind of envisioning like case studies of these smaller, kind of local projects that highlight these values, and you'll kind of call it out and offer resources for other people that want to implement those practices. Is that what you're saying?
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. And for like understanding, policy framework, I mean, that again, like outside of just the aquaculture project specifically, but like what policies are, region by region is going to be, that's kind of beyond the values, right? But that's a tool for people who are looking into this sort of thing. And that's, I think, a lot of where we can overlap with the aquaculture information exchange and also sounds like what you're working on. So yeah, would love to be able to link with all of these things as well.
Sounds good. Happy to share my resources too. I work for Sea Grant, so it's all kind of open. So happy
Amazing.
to connect.
And I just want to say
Okay.
thanks to Jay, also popped the survey link into the chat
Yes.
for everyone. Yes.
Yes. Thanks, Jay. Um, Susan, are you able to go off mute to ask your question? I just want you to be able to ask it so that it gets across. Maybe not. I can just go ahead and do my best guess at what Susan's asking. Um, I think, yeah, she left the question in the chat, but I think essentially, she's asking, do y'all see, um, with importing like feed, for example, from things outside of the United States, is that something that fits into this values-based framework? Um, I believe that's what she's asking. Okay, no worries, Susan. Thanks for clarifying that. She's not able to go off mute.
Yeah, I was just looking at her comment here. So I mean, that really just depends. I think we're really just focusing on what sort of extractive, you know, systems could happen from these projects. So if it like exploitative in nature, like harmful to the ecosystem, those are kind of the things that we're looking at when we're looking at these values. So like if you're in line with those and we would totally support those. I think I mean if you're obtaining your feed from those places but you feel that your project is sustainable in those ways and it's not harmful to the ecosystem and you're, you know, um, holding yourself accountable for what your product is doing to the surrounding ecosystem and the, you know, fish or shellfish themselves, then I think we would totally be open to supporting that.
I think
Thank
Hopefully
you.
that,
addition. Oh, yeah, and
yeah,
I
go ahead, Haley.
sure. I think additionally, like, some of these larger scale industry names like Cook, for example, we're less fond of. I think that's not like a secret, right? For what we're doing. Um, so I think that even the Atlas as a resource to maybe help practitioners transition away from reliance on, maybe foreign products or products from aquaculture, uh, industries elements that we find not in line with values would be something that we would like to offer to help make that transition because it's not like, oh, only if you're perfectly in line with all of these rules will we support you. Like we want to offer support to people who are interested in creating a values-based framework, and we understand that we can't always be purists about things. Like there is going to be some transition and some allowance for making centering these ideals, right? But yeah, visioning is a lot of what this project is, but also we want to cooperate and collaborate with what people are actually doing and learn about that. So yeah, thank you for that share, and um, we want to support you definitely however we can with this project.
Thank you. Aaron, I see you, but I just want to get to Mark and Mia's questions since they were in the chat. Mark was asking, I see Mia, you already answered the previous question just in terms of y'all covering aquaculture in the broad sense of the term. But he asked a follow-up question about, are you looking to work with existing organizations like the East Coast Shellfish Organization, Pacific Coast Shell, et cetera?
Yeah, and we have some of these networks in our uh like in line with North American Marine Alliance as is. I mean, like the Rhode Island Shell Fishermen's Association, for example. But we're again definitely focusing on kind of the smaller scale regional networks. We're not opposed to working with larger bodies as well because we want this to be available. I think, like what Emily's saying and what Mia has said is that, everyone wants to feel that they're doing the right thing in their work and in their practice. And it's not always clear what that is. So as much as we can spread this information to help people make decisions is, useful to us. So yeah, if you have context that you would like to share as well, that's super helpful for our development. Additionally, we would love to hear from you.
Cool. And then Mia's question was that she's a teacher and she's looking for materials such as life cycles, an interactive map that shows where and what products are grown, and a list of colleges with programs. I guess that was just some feedback rather than a question. But
Yeah,
no,
cool.
Mia,
That's really helpful. I really
yeah,
like those ideas, so we'll definitely be putting that on our list.
yeah, same. Mia, it's definitely not a complete list, but I know that on the AIE, I'll send a link to it. But we have a new to aquaculture group. And I know that people started to list some of the programs that are available in the US.
Yeah,
Aaron,
'cause
uh,
that's one of the things that I get a lot of questions because I have juniors and seniors, and they're
right.
interested in furthering whether they go necessarily into aquaculture or not. But they're like, where do I start? What do I do? And I'd like to give them. I have, I know some of the ones here in Florida, but I have students who will go anywhere for a good program. So not just having ones that are within my state, but knowing what some of the other programs across the nation are would be
Mhm.
helpful to give them some ideas.
Yeah. And something else that I'll just drop really quick, Mia, is we are having a virtual job fair at the end of the month as well. We are
Yes.
going to have some employers from around the country, including Cook, actually, present, and it we will have training programs there as well, who will be talking about what they offer if they're curious about that. So I'll leave that in the chat too, if you're curious. But Aaron, you've been waiting patiently. What was your question?
Hi all, I hope you can hear me okay. I am joining from from traveling. So one thing I'm wondering about the Atlas that may be helpful is this idea of providing resources to help small scale producers become economically sustainable. So with aquaculture, larger companies tend to um, really take over because their margins aren't as small. They have more stability economically. And the small scale producers are extremely important for food security across the world, but it can be really difficult for a small scale producer that maybe is following more of the community values that you guys were talking about to really make it and provide for their families and um, not go under, I guess, after 5 years, and things like that. So an atlas that provides like, yes, we want to follow values. I think everybody does want to follow values, but in order to make it economically make sense for somebody to create a different way of doing business, I think those kind of things will be extremely helpful, whether it's market connections, different business models, how to gain social license and backing from your communities. You have the customer base, thinking critically about what species you're growing, to work with the natural environment or work with local cultural desires in terms of what's offered. Um, and things like that. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. No, and we completely agree. And, making it actually possible for, small projects to thrive is a major part of this endeavor. I saw also, I just want to address Mark Casey asked in the chat, will we lobby for legislation? So, with this project specifically is not lobbying interests. However, I know that NAMA has engaged in lobbying for different policy previously, historically, um, to support, you know, small fishery. And yes, absolutely, it's part of the work. But for the atlas itself, all of these things that you just shared in terms of like what you want to see to make it viable economically, that is definitely a priority for us as well, and including legislation in that. So thank you for all of that input.
great. Anyone else have any questions related to the Aquaculture Atlas? And Mia, I just want to make sure you saw in the chat people are leaving various resources for training programs and that sort of thing in response to your question. Um,
Yes, thank you.
I guess one question, well, actually, Susan just asked another one, so I'll hold mine. But she was just asking where the funding is going to come for this project.
We received funding from Grace Communications for this project. So that was the main funder for this specific project.
And what I was going to ask was, you mentioned setting it up like a website. Do you envision it being similar to the AIE, which is sort of like a social networking type website, or is it more going to be like a traditional website that's like resources and links and that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be more resource based. That's a good question. So less,
Cool.
I think, around forums, but also like
Hmm.
having, it wouldn't be everyone is getting connected, but if we have an aquaculturist who's willing to have their information put out, like that person would be available to, convene with, for example. So yeah, I see lots of ways that we can, coalesce with our networks.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Um, Mark was asking again. Yeah, I guess like, do you plan on categorize? So, like for example, on the AIE with our courses, we have it split into different categories like shellfish and finfish and seaweed. Do y'all envision breaking your website down into similar categories?
That's a really great um, question. I don't know, Mia, do you have something to add? It looked like you were maybe going to say something.
Um, yeah, I was just thinking like I don't think we had really thought about that too much, so that's a great point. I mean, I would love to hear your feedback if you think that's something that's like helpful to break it down into categories like that. I would love to know if that's something that would be interesting or useful.
Yeah, and I think that there's some overlap for projects in general, like maybe, stories. Okay, let's think if we have an aquaculture project that we're, highlighting on the map, we would hope to have at least a couple of, seaweed farms, a couple of oyster farmers or what have you, um, you know, listed so that you could get different takes from different people, in different regions. Um, but things like funding sources, I would imagine, would be general. Shared language could also be more general, and research as well, though I think there's merit to divvying that up. So, yeah, thank you for that. That's great thought.
Another question that I had, which I sort of already looked into for myself when we were preparing for this talk, but sort of going off of what Emily asked earlier, because I believe that y'all have a bigger sort of like report about how y'all came to like the values that you identified in terms of values-based aquaculture. But I think it might help people understand the project better, just to explain how y'all arrived at those values.
Yeah, so the original values that we came up with were from a focus group that happened at one of our fly-ins, I believe. They had an event, and I think it was in Savannah. Yeah, it was in Savannah, and it was a bunch of practitioners from all across the country, and they just sat down and had a focus group about what values meant, what they meant to them, what were the most important things to them, and these were the ones that that group came up with. And since then, we've been working with folks who couldn't be there to make sure that these are in line with the way that they practice their aquaculture and do their research and frame their policies. And so it's kind of just been a work in progress. But I think we're finally, kind of landing on these as what people have said are the most important things to them.
Cool, thank you.
But we are open to if anyone has things to add or any thoughts about these. We're happy to have that discussion as well.
And Emily was asking, going off of that, just if y'all had more specifics as far as who was in the focus group, as far as like, what their profession or like what their job title was, et cetera.
Yeah, so they were from all across the board. So like Emily, you mentioned in the chat, it was farmers, policymakers, researchers, and all of those guys. So for those events that NAMA holds, we usually get people from a wide range of practice. And so that was what we were really looking for that focus group to have voices from, every side of the table.
I
Including also,
definitely
oh,
go ahead,
sorry.
Haley. Sorry.
Oh, no, yeah, I would just say including also like chefs. So people who are, kind of higher on the, I don't know what you would say, the food chain. I don't know, but like they're further along down the line
Right.
of, what kinds of products are these buyers actually interested in, right? Because that does matter, especially when we think about like farm to table, movements and, what makes a product attractive for a certain variety of food producers. So, yes, fishermen as well. Oh, hey, Casey.
And I wanted to give people, I've got more questions, but if I wanted to make sure if anybody else has any questions, we still have plenty of time. Okay, so yeah, Mark had another question going back to the questions of uh as far as like the supply chain. I Yeah, Mark, I think they did it. Not to speak for y'all, but I do believe they answered that earlier in regards to Susan's question about that they're willing to work with people who are doing imports as long as they align with the values. Is that generally correct, y'all?
Yeah, I would say we definitely want to prioritize, like US based fishery, but again, understanding like what on the ground is actually happening, we have to, we want this to be inclusive for you practitioners, not like, oh, I can never meet these standards. Like we want to help these standards become realistic for a kind of aquaculture that's minimally exploitative or extractive, as Mia said. We're working towards these goals. We're not saying, get out. We want to bring people in to these frameworks
Right.
for values. Yeah. Hopefully that helps.
Yes. And then as far as because you mentioned the focus group for determining these values, but I guess what was the inspiration behind doing the focus group in the first place, and why do you think it's important to sort of have the conversation about these values in aquaculture?
Yeah, so I think it came about just from need from our network. People were just, expressing that they really could use a resource that has, um, some of these aspects in it. And so then the discussion just happened, well, what would that look like? And it really just built off of that because there are so many different needs from different people and different folks. And a practitioner has different needs than a researcher or a policymaker or a nonprofit. And so we really just wanted to make it as inclusive as possible and also address like the needs that people were saying that they could really use in a resource like this. And so it's really built off of that, and that's why we're hoping to have these conversations over the course of the whole year here and really get feedback for what's the most useful for folks.
Haley, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think Mia really said it, and I think it's also just so important to have these conversations, period. Like, even if you're looking at these values and saying, I don't know if I line up with all of these values, that's okay. We want to have this conversation with you, and we want to, again, hear what actually makes sense practically and ways we can, you know, find common ground. So Inland Ocean Coalition is a coalition. That's Mia and I where we're coming from. And we don't always agree with everybody in a coalition, right? But we do have a shared common goal. And we really want our shared common goal to be, producing these aquaculture products that are good for people, good for the environment, good for the ecosystem. And I think we can all find a lot to agree on in that space.
Yeah, so in line, Aaron, I see your question, but while Aaron is asking her question, I encourage people in the chat, um, if like Haley was just saying, if you feel like some of these values don't align with yours, maybe drop that in the chat and I'll give them some sort of an idea of, where they might need to adjust or modify things. But go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I guess it's more of a comment. I don't know if this is helpful or not, but the first time I heard about the Atlas was at the Slow Fish conference in Charleston, and a lot of people there were talking about fisheries mostly. And when Mia started talking about the Atlas project, it sounded like it kind of came up from this idea of like the tension between wild caught fisheries and aquaculture sometimes. And there's sometimes language about like, seeming like aquaculture is being made as maybe um, very negative, like it's aquaculture or fisheries. And so the benefit of an atlas like this is almost trying to bridge that gap and say like, no, we're saying yes to aquaculture instead of just saying no, that like aquaculture is bad because it's against fisheries. Like, what are we saying yes to that is going to make both like our seafood production and availability for feeding the world, or at least the United States, in the next 5, 10, 20 years, make those two like areas of production work together and to promote seafood overall, and make a better seafood system. Um, so I don't know, that was more of a comment. I guess my question is, do you see any consumer resources fitting into this atlas, or do you think that's a separate a project
Yeah.
to kind of show people like, this is where these small scale producers are. This is what these producers are doing to also maybe give back to the local community or give back to the local ecosystems. Something that's educating people about like, what are we saying yes to in terms of aquaculture?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that this atlas specifically is less for consumers and more for practitioners. And when we are thinking about consumers through this map, we're really more thinking about connecting you to markets, right? As an aquaculturist, like more wholesale markets or like chefs who's going to buy directly in larger quantities probably. But that element is not lost on us, that it's important how we communicate not only to each other, in this space, but also broadly to people who have less, background and knowledge of this domain. So yeah, I'm really glad that you remembered us, that we were memorable from Slowfish. Mia, do you have anything to add to that, about kind of what the Atlas like resource and network is providing?
I mean, I agree with you. I think we are still seeking. We did just do a survey with just a consumer survey just to see what people's thoughts are about aquaculture. Where are they obtaining, their information? How are they, when they're going out to eat, are they like specifically looking for a certain kind of food? So those things are on our radar for what consumers are looking for in terms of when they're purchasing or when they're going out to eat, for aquaculture. So we're looking for feedback from the consumer to kind of build out what the resources for the Atlas look like. But I don't know that I mean, maybe we will include some sort of a section for consumer. And that's definitely a possibility. But I think Local Catch Network really has a nice system that they're using for consumers to buy locally caught or values based seafood. And so we don't want to reinvent the wheel when there's already a resource out there like that. So we may just link to other resources that are already kind of doing that type of stuff.
Yeah, and again, like we, just to add to that about how kind of really early we are in the development. We don't, I mean, our domain isn't even up yet. Like this is a kind of just a landing page for you guys. So the audiences we're focusing on now are really specific to, people involved in aquaculture beyond like consuming fish products. But in the future, does that mean that that's where we stay? I could absolutely see it growing out to include consumers, in the audiences that we're targeting. And I would just like to bring back to what Joe said about these values. I'm really curious for all of you on the call, if there is one value that stands out to you most as maybe your priority, or, alongside that, a value that feels like a sticking point. I would be so curious to hear from each of you, like, top value and bottom value sort of thing, if that's something you feel comfortable sharing. Would love to hear, like that would be incredible feedback, to just drop in the chat or to come on and audio and say.
So it seems, and Susan just dropped another comment slash question, but I do think what I'm seeing as sort of a theme in the chat so far is just around the food supply, that value, just because Susan, her comment is just talking about how it really is difficult to get feed, um, that that sort of aligns with everyone's values, um, and that, like, alternative feeds haven't necessarily become or like been as successful, as maybe they're promising, which, as someone with not really an aquaculture background, I can't really comment on. But yeah, interested to hear if y'all have a take on that as far as feed when it comes to that value of securing our food supply.
I mean, I would just say, like, I'm so happy to hear from you guys that this is a sticking point, because this is absolutely something that we will prioritize in what we look into and what we share to make it manageable for practitioners to actually be in line with values. Like, of course, I want to know what, feels great about these values to all of you, but saying, well, what's the holdup? What's the issue? What's keeping me from living in line with these values that feel kind of out of reach? That's where our interest really lies, and how can we facilitate that? So do I have the answer of like, oh, here's a feed, you can buy today? No, I don't. But we have a whole team of people who are really interested, dedicated in looking into that and being able to provide alternatives that are not just, hot air, right? Or what have you, that are not like false solutions. We really want to be able to provide something that is going to be effective for you guys in your process. Mia, if you have something to add, go for it. Otherwise, yeah. Any other questions? And thanks to everyone who's shouting out your values in the chat.
Yeah, it sounds like community and yeah, John mentioned the food supply and the safeguarding ecosystems are the top ones. Emily, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say that I think I'm getting more clarity about this project as we keep going. It's more of that you're kind of shining, these are the goalposts, and we're all somewhere along in the route, and you want to be able to have resources for each person to move closer to the goalposts, which makes sense. Because at first I was thinking the values are kind of inclusion exclusion criteria, and I was like, how's that gonna work? Because then you have to have someone kind of making the boundary. So I guess I'm curious with case studies and stories, then is the idea to shine a light on people that have made a positive change rather than kind of these are the group that are doing it. Because I think that will lead towards exclusion and hard feelings rather than collaboration and movement towards the goalposts. So just kind of curious about your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I absolutely feel that social modeling is going to be huge. And oops, sorry, everybody moving away. Social modeling is going to be huge. Like, what does it look like to be done, values based, right? Those are the stories we want to share. And what are the challenges in that? And what are the sticking points? And how can we help you overcome those challenges to get you more in line with, you know, a practice that's more sustainable, economically, environmentally, people power, all of that involved. But yeah, definitely, I think it can feel intimidating. But we want to work with you guys. We're not going to be keeping this information away from the aquaculture community. We want it shared broadly, and we want it, seen as like, here's some, you know, ways to open the door or like to get your foot in the door to this kind of practice. Including for like students, I think as Mia said, people who are young and looking to get into this industry, you know, it's growing. The industry isn't going anywhere, so we have to kind of vision what it looks like again to be in line with values because it's so easy for things to not be.
Cool. And yeah, just a couple more, and we have about 10 more minutes for questions. Some other comments, the safeguarding the ecosystem, the healthy food, earning a dignified living. I think that can fall under the protect workers sort of, although maybe it's slightly different. Um, and yeah, Mark commenting that healthy food is a challenge with the current environmental issues, technology to change the food that our food eats. So going back to feed again. Um, any other questions for Haley and Mia? I think for me, what Emily was just talking about, and sort of relate to what Aaron was just saying too. Just speaking from my experience on the AIE, that with aquaculture in particular, that there is a lot of misconceptions around aquaculture that every producer in America has to sort of face, especially like as a marketing challenge. And that some of those misconceptions I think have historically come from environmental concerns that were that without being a historian myself, but like assuming that those environmental concerns had good intentions behind them, but that they still led to like these misconceptions about aquaculture. And then also tying that into how, aquaculture in America, um, in my experience, is still very regional. Um, and that, like part of the mission of the AIE is to sort of bring the entire community together on a national scale. to confront challenges like misinformation about aquaculture. Um, but like obviously there has to be like part of the mission of the AIE too is to have real conversations about aquaculture, which also includes like values like the ones that y'all have presented on. So like I guess I'm just curious, like, as far as both like the misconceptions part and then also that regional aspect, what's y'all's thinking going into building out this tool as far as overcoming those obstacles?
Yeah. So I'm gonna try to great big journalistic question from Joe. Love it. I'm gonna try to address what I can from what I'm remembering. But I think like the history of conservation is so interesting because again, one of these things where at least in like wild salmon conservation in my background, it's hunters and fisher folk who are leading the charge for conservation, right? And for conserved lands. It's hunters, and then there's an element of the conservation movement that's like, oh, don't kill animals, no hunting. We have to be able to incorporate these, you know, different perspectives to have an actual holistic movement. In my opinion, this is me speaking from my opinion. I'm not being paid by NAMA or IOC to say this. This is, I think that the history of conservation is really contentious and is not specifically an issue with aquaculture of things being kind of misaligned or misconstrued. So for, I would say like this project, the development of shared language is a big one for how are we going to approach the consumer base and also other conservation networks that may feel differently about these issues. Where can we find common ground and leading with the values is where we hope to be able to do that. I think that's kind of the core of this project. The other thing you were saying about regional differences, and again, that's why we're not saying, okay, well, buying this feed is values based and buying this feed is not. Like we can't say that because different regions are going to have different practices and techniques that are going to, you know, apply to different projects. And we're again looking at scope and looking at understanding what that transpires to on the ground. That's a lot of the work happening now, and building out kind of an advisory board of actual practitioners who can give better insights into this. If people on this call are interested in being part of the process, being part of the advisory board, we would love to hear from you. That's another thing. I'm going to put this up on the screen again because, yeah, we're looking for practitioners to help inform this process. And we're so grateful for all the feedback. I want to address also that Emily asked about our timeline. We're hoping to launch our domain in the first quarter of next year. So we're really doing a lot of information gathering, and the information gathering will be continuous through the process. So we're not just stopping.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback off that because I'm taking diligent notes here, but I would love if you guys can find the time to please fill out the survey because these are really going to help inform us as we move forward. And we have not, it's so shockingly, as it might seem, we have not had a lot of people take the survey, and we're not really comfortable moving forward until we have that insight from folks. So it is extremely helpful if you guys take the survey.
There's a great conversation happening in the chat about misconceptions and what those look like. So yeah, we're also curious to gather information about that as well. Like what are the challenges uphill that you're facing as practitioners in, getting off the ground or promoting your products? Yeah, Mark says he's interested. We would love to have you involved, Mark. Please reach out through this email or Mia and I's contact info as well. And all of this will be, like Joe said, recorded and shared. I can, let's see, go back to the first page if people want our specific contact information, but this email works. Yeah, Mia, you have access to this email, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, anyway, all roads lead to Rome.
And Susan, in response to your question, CSA is on the AIE. I don't think I'm familiar with any of the other groups you're referring to, but we also do have a funding group on the AIE as well, to share funding sources. And I also, Casey, you had asked in specific, um, like what was being referred to as far as misconceptions. I just dropped a link to a discussion on the AIE, where people had a pretty thorough discussion on the misconceptions if you wanted to check that out. We only have a couple minutes left, so just maybe time for one more question. If anyone has one.
I have a question for you, Joe.
Sure,
Will the
sure.
chat also be shared in will the chat be made available as well?
That is a good question. We haven't done that before, but I think
Okay.
it should be possible.
Yeah, I'm just loving all
Um,
this conversation. So yeah,
yeah,
have access to that.
yeah.
Awesome.
Let me think about how we could do that. But yeah, I think that's definitely possible.
Totally.
Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining. Yeah, if there's any last lingering questions.
Yeah, and yeah, if y'all do think of questions, Haley and Mia shared their emails. But yeah, you can also uh, ask on the AIE. Um, Aaron, I think that question you just left would be a really good one for us to discuss on the AIE about how workforce development fits into this. Um, and yeah, so if y'all haven't joined the AIE, I'll go ahead and drop a link in the chat to that really quick. Um, but yeah, we like I just mentioned in the previous question, you know, we definitely want to create a space for conversations like these to be had. Um, you know, I think it shows growth in the aquaculture community that these conversations are being had, and that's like what we were set up to do, was sort of foster that sort of growth and sharing of information. So Mia and Haley, thanks again for presenting. Um, and yeah, I think we will wrap it up there, and hope to see you all in the AIE. Thanks again for joining.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you guys. This was great. Very helpful.
Appreciate it. See y'all.
Bye,
See
everyone.
ya.